Hello, I am George Bernard Shaw, resurrected to find my Pygmalion still stirs debate. I'm here to dissect the play a bit, building on a rather intriguing analysis I recently encountered. You see, Pygmalion isn't just a simple comedy about a flower girl learning to speak properly. It's a darker tale about how society shapes us, and how we use tools, technologies, if you will, to mold people. Think of it as exploring the idea that technology isn't neutral. It carries the biases of those who create and use it. Take my character, Henry Higgins, and his obsession with phonetics. He believes he can turn Eliza Doolittle into a lady purely through speech training. But this training isn't objective science. It's deeply rooted in social prejudice, reflecting the flawed idea that speech determines social class. It's all rather like trying to build a person, wouldn't you agree? Ah, yes, where were we? Technology. Not just cogs and gears, you see, but the tools and methods we use to shape the world, and more importantly, each other. In Pygmalion, I posited that phonetics, the science of speech, is one such technology. My character, Higgins, uses his understanding of phonetics and recording equipment to dissect Eliza Doolittle's Cockney accent. He subjects her to rigorous training, aiming to replace her natural speech with the correct pronunciation of the upper class. This seemingly objective scientific method is, in reality, deeply intertwined with social prejudice. The idea of phonetics defining social class reflects the flawed notion of a scientific basis for social hierarchy. Keep in mind that while technology is objective, our interpretation is not. Correct speech is not inherently superior, but a social marker imposed by the upper class. And of course, there's clothing and grooming. In Pygmalion, Eliza's physical appearance is a crucial technology in her transformation. It is more than mere decoration. It's a calculated system of signals designed to project a specific social identity. Fine fabrics, elegant designs, and meticulous grooming are deployed to erase her working-class origins and signal her newfound status. From my perspective, writing this, I was exploring how such superficial changes can be deceptively powerful. The way Eliza is dressed and presented is not merely aesthetic. It actively reshapes how others perceive and treat her. This aspect reveals how societal expectations and visual cues are technologies used to build up and reinforce social stratifications. It highlights how something as seemingly benign as fashion can be a potent tool for social engineering. Not solely about elocution, it extends to her clothing, her grooming, and her deportment. These too are technologies, tools used to shape and mold her into the desired image. I believe that examining these technologies shows how identity is not simply inherent, but rather something constructed through a complex interplay of social forces and technological interventions. When I wrote Pygmalion, I wanted to highlight how these technologies are never neutral. They carry with them the biases and assumptions of those who create and wield them. Specifically regarding speech training, the very idea of correct speech is not based on any inherent superiority, but rather on the social preferences of the upper class. This preference then becomes encoded within these technologies, perpetuating existing power structures. Through my play, I aim to reveal the way these supposedly objective tools can be used to reinforce social hierarchies. And so, my play becomes a rather chilling reflection, I think, on eugenics, social engineering, and the anxieties that were bubbling about concerning this shift toward industrial standardization, even in human beings. Now, when we look at it through the lens of how technology shapes society and how different elements interact, it's clear that in Pygmalion, the most important technology isn't some machine in the traditional sense, but rather a cluster of approaches that all contribute to the production of a lady. These approaches, both material and social, are far from neutral. They're imbued with the values and biases of the dominant social class. One key technology, of course, is phonetics and speech training. My character, Higgins, prizes his scientific understanding of phonetics, using equipment to capture Eliza's speech, analyze it, and correct it. However, this seemingly objective technology is deeply intertwined with social prejudice. Higgins's belief in the power of phonetics to define social class reflects flawed notions of a scientific basis for social hierarchy, echoing eugenicist ideas. And so, the technologies of transformation, as I presented, extend far beyond mere elocution lessons. Consider clothing and grooming, for example. The sartorial transformation of Eliza is not simply about aesthetics. It's a deliberate act of social engineering. The clothes she wears, the way she's styled, all serve to visually erase her Cockney origins and assimilate her into the upper classes. This reinforces the notion that appearance, like speech, is a technology used to construct and perform identity. Bear in mind that these tools are not neutral. Their meaning and impact are shaped by the values of the dominant class. This perspective, where technology's development is seen as a product of social forces and values, along with how various elements act upon one another, reveals the power dynamics at play in my play, Pygmalion. Eliza is molded, not merely taught, according to the whims of a particular societal vision, and of course Eliza's physical appearance. Clothing and grooming are potent technologies in my play. They are not merely aesthetic choices, but rather tools used to signal social status and control perception. Eliza is stripped of her original clothing, symbolic of her Cockney identity, and is dressed in garments deemed appropriate for a lady. This includes not only dresses and hats, but also the restrictive undergarments of the time, which literally molded her body to fit the expected form. This process highlights how appearance is actively constructed and used to perform a specific social role. The act of grooming, including hairstyling, and the teaching of proper posture and deportment, are further methods of shaping Eliza into a more socially acceptable form. Even something as seemingly innocuous as how one walks or sits becomes a technology of social transformation, reinforcing the idea that identity is performative and subject to manipulation, not solely linguistic. The clothing and grooming bestowed upon her are technologies in themselves. These are technologies because they are constructed means to an end. They allow Eliza to be read as a lady. Fine dresses, fashionable hairstyles, and proper etiquette function as visual and performative markers of social status. These are technologies of presentation. From my perspective, as the playwright, I was keenly aware of how superficial these markers could be, yet how powerfully they shaped social perceptions. In early 20th century Britain, these technologies had a stabilizing effect on the class structure, reinforcing the existing power dynamics. The interpretive flexibility of these technologies lies in their ability to be manipulated and reinterpreted. Yet, in a world obsessed with appearances, such manipulation could have profound, even disturbing consequences. This is what I wanted to show. And then there's clothing and grooming, key technologies in Eliza's transformation. When I wrote Pygmalion, I wanted to show how these elements aren't merely superficial. They're tools, deliberately employed to reshape her social identity. Her appearance is meticulously curated, reflecting the standards of the Edwardian upper class. Think about it. Each dress, each hairstyle, is a deliberate intervention aimed at erasing her Cockney origins and signaling her new elevated status. This highlights the social construction of technology concept. The very definition of what constitutes appropriate dress and grooming is not objective. It's shaped by societal values and power structures. It's fascinating to consider how these elements are stabilized and accepted as the norm, thereby reinforcing social distinctions, a point that is important in actor network theory. And as I was saying, the very concept of correct speech as I presented it wasn't some objective truth. It was a social construction, a tool used to maintain class distinctions. The technology of sound recording, you see, was supposedly objective. Yet the interpretation of Eliza's recorded voice, the determination of what constituted proper pronunciation, was entirely filtered through the prejudices of Victorian society. This is what those modern academics call the social construction of technology, the idea that technology isn't neutral, but shaped by social forces. And my play, though I say so myself, demonstrates this beautifully. The way that technology, and specifically the technology of phonetics, was stabilized and accepted within upper-class society is a good example of that. And the second key technology, of course, is clothing and grooming. Eliza's transformation isn't solely about how she speaks, it's also about how she looks. The acquisition of fashionable clothing and the adoption of upper-class grooming standards are vital components of her manufactured identity. This highlights how physical appearance is not a natural attribute, but rather a carefully constructed performance. Now, consider that the technology of clothing and grooming isn't a neutral tool. It's laden with the values of the upper class. Remember, in examining how technologies shape society, we see they are not neutral. They reflect the biases of those who create and control them. This social construction, as we call it, and seeing the role of all actors, helps us understand how seemingly simple tools, like a change of clothes, can perpetuate social inequalities. From my perspective, the play reveals that becoming a lady is a technological feat, a process of manufactured identity. Ah, yes, clothing and grooming, the sartorial aspect of Eliza's supposed transformation. In my play, Pygmalion, this is far from a neutral element. It is a technology in itself, as clothing is a tool of social engineering. The clothes that are imposed upon her are not merely coverings, but are signifiers of class. They are constructed within the upper class to signal status. Consider that the definition of acceptable attire is far from organic. This is not an inherent superiority, but an imposition. It's a performance, a masquerade carefully orchestrated to meet the expectations of a very specific social circle. And as a playwright, I was well aware of how costume dictates character in the eyes of the audience, as it does in society. Transformation isn't solely about speech. The clothing she wears, her grooming, her manners, all become technologies in this process. They are tools employed to construct a new identity for her. These technologies are also socially constructed. What constitutes appropriate dress and behavior for a lady is dictated by the prevailing social norms of the time. I, of course, was commenting on how easily outward appearance is mistaken for true social standing. Consider how these elements, like Higgins's phonetics, are not neutral. They reflect the biases of the upper class. These technologies are stabilized through their constant use and enforcement within that class, further solidifying existing social hierarchies. In my perspective, this highlights the disturbing ease with which people can be molded to fit predefined social roles. Not solely linguistic, it also involves a complete overhaul of her appearance. The clothing she wears, the way she's groomed, these are technologies of social presentation. They are designed to signal her new social status. These things are not simply superficial adornments. They are active participants in the construction of her new identity. From my perspective, these technologies are tools for social engineering, wielded by Higgins with a disturbing lack of self-awareness. He sees himself as a benevolent scientist, but he's actually imposing a very specific, very narrow definition of what it means to be a lady onto Eliza. It is critical to understand that what is considered correct speech, like dress, is based on social convention, not some objective truth. This is a key part of how societies maintain their hierarchies. And speaking of surface improvements, let's consider clothing and grooming. In Pygmalion, these are technologies for constructing identity. Eliza isn't just cleaned up. She's strategically reclothed and styled to embody upper-class ideals. This involves corsets, specific fabrics, hairstyles, each element a carefully chosen signal designed to broadcast her new social standing. From my perspective as the playwright, this is where the power dynamics become intensely visible. These aren't merely aesthetic choices, they are tools of control. Eliza's agency is diminished as she is molded to fit a predetermined ideal of what a lady should be. The clothing becomes a visible manifestation of the constraints imposed upon her, reflecting the broader social forces at play. It also reminds us that appearances are indeed deceptive. And of course, no lady would be seen in rags. So, Eliza's transformation isn't solely about what she says, but also profoundly connected to how she looks. New clothes, proper grooming, these aren't merely superficial additions. They're crucial technologies in the social construction of identity. These material objects reinforce the desired image of a lady, but reflect upper-class values onto her. Consider the power dynamics at play. I use these elements to illustrate how technology, specifically something as simple as clothing, can become a tool for social control. The correct style of dress, much like correct speech, is determined by those in power, further solidifying their dominance. By transforming Eliza's external appearance, Higgins also attempts to reshape her internal sense of self. This is what I intended to convey. Now let's consider clothing and grooming. In Pygmalion, Eliza's transformation isn't solely about speech. The clothes she wears, the way she is groomed, these are all technologies of social transformation as well. They are actively deployed to recode her social identity. I was interested in how clothes are not neutral things. They are imbued with social meaning. The expensive gowns and meticulous grooming that Eliza receives are tools, every bit as powerful as Higgins's phonetic exercises. They signal her entry into a new social sphere. This is an example of social construction of technology, how technologies are shaped by social forces, and in turn, shape society. Actor network theory would say that her clothes are non-human actors in the network of her transformation, influencing how others perceive her, and therefore, how they interact with her. And then there's the very clothes on Eliza's back. This is certainly a technology I examined when writing Pygmalion. The clothing, the grooming, these are technologies of social performance. They are designed to signal status and belonging. I presented them, not as mere superficialities, but as integral components of the transformation process. They highlight the way identity is constructed and performed through material culture. Consider the power dynamics at play. Higgins wields his phonetic expertise as a tool to reshape Eliza, almost as if she were a machine. He believes that by altering her speech, he can unlock a new social identity for her. But this transformation comes at a cost. The social construction of technology asks us to consider how things we often think of as neutral are, in fact, deeply entwined with social values. Actor network theory makes us examine all the players in a system, even the non-human ones, not solely about speech. Clothing and grooming are essential technologies in her recreation. These aren't just superficial changes. They are integral to how society perceives and classifies her. The carefully chosen gowns, the elaborate hairstyles, the enforced etiquette, all serve as visible markers of her newly acquired social status. From my perspective, these elements highlight how identity is not inherent, but rather something constructed and performed through material objects. Eliza is literally clothed in the symbols of upper-class identity. The social norms and expectations embedded within these objects shape her behavior and constrain her agency. It is a technology of transformation as potent as any elocution lesson. This dressing is a form of social engineering, reflecting society's values imposed on the individual. Remember, I wrote this piece. And of course, there is clothing and grooming. Eliza's transformation isn't solely about speech. It involves a complete overhaul of her appearance, her clothes, her hairstyle, her deportment. These are also technologies, social technologies, designed to signal her new social status. From my perspective, this illustrates the core of social construction of technology. The idea that technology, even something as seemingly simple as a dress, isn't neutral. It's shaped by social values and, in turn, shapes society. Likewise, actor network theory states these technologies aren't just inert objects. Eliza's new clothes actively participate in shaping her identity and her interactions with the world, creating an entire network of social expectations. Her very being is now intertwined with objects and expectations. Did I know all of that as I wrote the play? Perhaps not consciously, but I certainly saw its effects. It's